Isaac Newton lost $3 million in a single stock crash. Not a random investor. The man who invented calculus. The smartest human being alive fell for a scam. The year was 1720, and Britain's entire economy collapsed overnight. The South Sea Company's stock rose 900% in 6 months. Then it crashed to zero in weeks. Families lost everything. Suicides followed. Parliament launched investigation. Company executives fled the country with bags of gold. But here's what makes no sense. The South Sea Company never actually did any real business. No ships. No trade. No products. Just paper certificates. This was the original pump and dump scheme. And it destroyed the British middle class. So how did a fake company convince the smartest people in Europe? How did Newton, a literal genius, lose his fortune? It started 9 years earlier with a brilliant lie. Britain had a massive problem in 1711. The government owed £30 million from endless wars with France. Nobody knew how to pay it back. Enter Robert Harley, the Lord Treasurer, with a genius solution. He'd create a company that would take over the entire national debt. In exchange, the company got a monopoly on all trade with South America. Investors would buy stock in this company. The stock price would rise because South America meant unlimited wealth. Gold. Silver. Exotic goods. An empire of profit. The company launched as the South Sea Company in 1711. The king himself endorsed it. Parliament approved it. Aristocrats invested millions. There was just one tiny problem nobody mentioned. Spain controlled all of South America. Britain was literally at war with Spain. No British ship could legally dock in Spanish colonies. The company's monopoly was worthless. But here's the loophole that made everything possible. British law in 1711 had zero regulations on stock companies. You could claim anything. Promise anything. No audits required. No financial disclosures. No accountability. The South Sea Company never had to prove they did any business. They just had to make people believe they would. And they were brilliant at it. The directors started a rumor campaign across London. Whispers in coffee houses about Spanish treaty negotiation. Fake news about treasure fleets arriving soon. They bribed members of parliament with free stock. They bribed journalists to write glowing articles. They even bribed the king's mistresses to talk up the company. Then they launched the genius part of the con. You didn't need full payment to buy stock. Just 10% down. The rest in installments over years. A maid earning £20 a year could buy shares. A clerk could invest his entire savings with almost no cash. Suddenly everyone in London could gamble on getting rich. The stock price started climbing in 1719. £100 per share. Then 200. Then 300. Insiders would leak fake good news right before selling their shares. The price would spike. They'd cash out. New suckers would buy in. This is called a pump and dump scheme today. In 1720, it was just called business. By early 1720, the stock hit £500 per share. The company announced they'd take over even more government debt. Parliament loved this because it solved their budget crisis. Investors loved it because the stock kept rising. King George I became the official governor of the company. If the king trusted it, how could it be a scam? Newton watched from the sidelines at first. He was master of the Royal Mint, a government position. He understood money better than almost anyone. He bought shares early at £200 each. When they hit 400, he sold everything. He'd made a killing. Smart move. Get out early. But then he watched everyone around him get richer without him. His friends doubled their money. Then tripled it. The stock hit £700. Then 800. Newton's genius brain started doing the math on his missed profits. In April 1720, he bought back in at the peak. But something else was happening that nobody saw coming. A bank was about to run out of money. By summer 1720, London had completely lost its mind. The South Sea Company stock hit £1,000 per share. A share bought for 100 was now worth 10 times that. On paper, everyone was rich. Maids quit their jobs to day trade stocks full-time. Clerks became millionaires overnight without ever working again. The company's headquarters on Threadneedle Street had lines around the block. People waited hours just to buy more shares. The directors lived like absolute kings. John Blunt, the company's chief director, bought a massive country estate. He owned multiple London mansions worth millions in today's money. He rode in gold-trimmed carriages with 6 horses. His parties had champagne fountains and orchestras. Other directors did the same. Estates. Servants. Political power. They bribed half of Parliament with free stock grants. The Duchess of Kendal, the king's mistress, received shares worth tens of thousands. The company paid her to whisper good things about them to the king. And it worked. King George I wasn't just an investor anymore. He was the official governor of the South Sea Company. His face gave the company legitimacy no amount of money could buy. If the king trusted them, they must be safe, right? Newspapers called it the greatest financial innovation in history. Poets wrote verses about the South Sea miracle. Political economists praised the genius of the debt conversion scheme. The company had somehow solved Britain's financial crisis. Except they hadn't actually done anything. Not a single ship had sailed to South America. Not 1 ounce of gold had been imported. The company's only real business was selling its own stock. But nobody cared because everyone was getting rich. At least on paper. The mania spread beyond just the South Sea Company. Copycat bubble companies launched every single day. Someone started a company to extract silver from lead. Another promised to build a perpetual motion wheel. One company claimed they discovered how to make guns that shot square bullets. The most absurd one sold shares in a company for quote carrying out an undertaking of great advantage but nobody to know what it is end quote. The founder collected £2,000 in a single morning. Then he vanished and was never seen again. This was fraud in broad daylight and nobody stopped it. Even Newton couldn't resist the madness. He'd already made money and gotten out early. But watching everyone else get richer drove him insane. In April 1720, he bought back in at nearly the peak. He invested £20,000, his entire fortune. The stock was at £700 per share. By June it hit £1,000. Newton was up 40% in 2 months. Every coffee house in London buzzed with stock tips. Servants discussed share prices with their employers. A fishmonger could lecture a lawyer about portfolio strategy. The entire social order flipped upside down. Old money families watched their servants get rich faster than them. But something changed in late June 1720. The South Sea directors started quietly selling their own shares. Not publicly. Just private sales to insiders. They knew something the public didn't. The Sword Blade Bank, the company's financial partner, had a problem. They'd been lending money to investors so they could buy more stock. Thousands of loans. Millions of pounds lent out. The bank's cash reserves were running dangerously low. And there was another problem nobody was talking about. All those installment plans from earlier. Remember how people only paid 10% down? The rest was due in installments over the next month. Suddenly thousands of investors owed money they didn't actually have. They'd gambled their future earnings on the stock going up forever. But in early July, something broke. New buyers stopped showing up. For the first time in months, demand stalled. The stock price held at £1,000 but stopped climbing. Then on July 14th, it dropped to £900. Just a small dip. Probably nothing. Except the Sword Blade Bank couldn't lend any more money. Without new loans, there were no new buyers. Without new buyers, the price couldn't go up. And if the price didn't go up, people couldn't pay their installments. A single email would destroy everything in today's world. In 1720, it was a single closed bank window. August 1720 arrived with a silent crash. The Sword Blade Bank stopped lending money for stock purchases. They'd run completely out of cash reserves. Without loans, new buyers vanished overnight. The South Sea stock price dropped from £1,000 to £900. Then £800. Then £700. All in the span of 2 weeks. Investors who bought on installment plans suddenly owed massive payments. They couldn't pay. They tried to sell their shares instead. But now everyone was trying to sell at once. The price dropped to £600 in early September. Then 500. Then 400. The directors held an emergency meeting and made a desperate move. They tried to halt all trading in company stock. Parliament refused. The free market must continue, they said. By mid-September the stock hit £300 per share. 90% of investors were now underwater on their loans. The Sword Blade Bank officially collapsed on September 24. Depositors lost everything. Riots broke out in London streets. The stock price crashed to £200. Then 100. Then lower. Isaac Newton watched his entire fortune evaporate in real time. He'd invested £20,000 at £700 per share. The stock was now worth less than 100. He'd lost nearly everything. About 3 million in today's money. The man who could calculate planetary orbits couldn't predict human madness. Parliament launched an official investigation in October 1720. They demanded the company's financial records immediately. The directors stalled. They claimed documents were incomplete. Investigators got a court order and seized the books anyway. What they found was pure fraud on every single page. Fictional trade agreements with Spain that never existed. Forged balance sheets showing profits from ships that never sailed. Bribe payments to over 100 members of parliament. Cash transfers to the king's mistresses totaling £50,000. Directors had sold their personal shares weeks before the crash. They knew it was fake and got out while everyone else burned. John Blunt, the chief director, tried to flee to France. Border guards caught him with trunks full of gold coins. Other directors made it across the channel and vanished into Europe. The mobs were already forming outside their London mansion. Windows smashed. Furniture burned in the streets. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, John Iloby, was arrested. He'd taken massive bribes to push the debt scheme through Parliament. His trial lasted 3 months. Guilty on all counts. They seized his estates and stripped him of all titles. The Postmaster General was found guilty of corruption too. Parliament arrested 8 company directors in total. Their combined wealth was confiscated to repay investors. But it was nowhere near enough money. The company had sold shares worth £500 million. Directors seized assets totaled maybe £2 million. 99% of the losses were permanent. Families who invested their life savings lost everything. Pension funds collapsed. Retirement accounts vanished. 3 investors committed suicide in a single week. Newton sat in his study and calculated his exact losses. He wrote in his journal, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies. But not the madness of people." He never invested in stocks again for the rest of his life. The company itself somehow survived in zombie form. It technically still held the government debt contract. But the stock traded at worthless prices for decades. By October 1720, the stock hit £40 per share. A 96% loss from the peak just 4 months earlier. Britain's economy ground to a halt. Credit vanished. Banks closed. Trade stopped. The richest empire on earth was suddenly broke. And Parliament had to answer one final question. How do you stop this from ever happening again? It banned any company from issuing stock without a royal charter. No more anonymous ventures. No more fake promises. No more bubbles. Except the law accidentally crippled British innovation for a century. Real companies couldn't raise money easily anymore either. The act stayed on the books until 1825. John Iloby, the Chancellor, spent the rest of his life in disgrace. He died broke and forgotten in 1742. John Blunt kept a fraction of his fortune through legal loopholes. He lived comfortably until 1733 but was despised until his death. 8 directors had their estates seized by Parliament. The government recovered about £2 million total. But investors had lost over £500 million. Less than 1% of losses were ever repaid. A widow named Anne Urquhart lost her entire inheritance of £3,000. She spent her final years in poverty. A merchant named Thomas Guy actually got rich shorting the stock. He used his profits to found Guy's Hospital in London. It still operates today. Built on bubble money. Newton's losses haunted him but he stayed wealthy from his government salary. He died in 1727, still bitter about the madness of crowd. The South Sea Bubble created the template for modern financial regulation. Required financial disclosures. Independent audits. Anti-manipulation laws. The idea that companies must prove their business is real. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The exact same pattern repeated in 1929. Stock prices rose 900%, then crashed 80%. Margin loans. Fake profits. Insiders cashing out early. It happened again in the dot-com bubble of 2000. Companies with zero revenue trading at billion-dollar valuation. Pets.com, Webvan. eToys. All worthless within 2 years. Then the 2008 housing crisis followed the identical script. Mortgage-backed securities nobody understood. Rating agencies lying about risk. Banks selling garbage and calling it gold. And right now in 2024, crypto pump and dumps mirror the South Sea playbook. Tokens with no underlying value rising 10,000%. Influencers pumping coins then vanishing with investor money. The technology changes. The psychology never does. Greed. Fear of missing out. The belief that this time is different. Newton proved that genius doesn't protect you from these forces. Intelligence can't override the madness of crowds. The South Sea Bubble taught us that markets need regulation. That transparency matters. That fraud scales. Every financial crash since 1720 traces back to the same human weakness. We see others getting rich and assume the rules don't apply anymore. Until they do. Until the music stops. Until the crash comes. Newton's lesson still echoes 300 years later. You can calculate the stars but not the madness of people. And that's how the South Sea Bubble changed financial regulation forever.